When the salvage tug Wayfarer's Mercy picked up the distress ping, Captain Elias Mercer almost ignored it. Not because he was cruel. Quite the opposite, actually. Elias had built a reputation along the frontier lanes as the sort of man who never passed a cry for help if there was even a sliver of a chance someone was still alive. But the signal was old,
weak,
fragmented. The kind that usually meant a derelict probe, or a buoy that had been drifting since before he'd grown his first gray hair. Scan says it's coming from inside that debris cluster, his navigator, Priya, said, tapping at her console. The main screen showed a slow rotation of twisted metal, frozen gas, and shattered hull plates, what was left of some long-dead ship that had met something far more violent than time. Elias sighed and rubbed his eyes. Any life signs? Nothing consistent, Priya replied. But the ping is repeating. Automated, maybe. Or, she hesitated. Or something very small. That made him sit up straighter. The Wayfarer's Mercy wasn't a warship. It wasn't even a proper exploration vessel. It was a patched-together salvage tug that survived on hauling wrecks and occasionally towing broken ships back to ports that charged more than they should. But it had a med bay. It had a crew that still believed in doing the right thing. And it had a captain who couldn't live with himself if he left even one chance unanswered. "All right," Elias said. "Let's take a look." They maneuvered carefully into the debris field, thrusters whispering as they threaded through the floating graveyard. The source of the signal turned out to be a cracked escape pod lodged between two broken hull sections. Its surface was scorched, its markings long faded, and one side had been crushed inward like a giant had taken a bite out of it. "Life support is barely holding," Priya said. "Power's almost gone." "Get it inside," Elias ordered.
"Now."
The crew worked fast. The pod was dragged into the cargo bay, and when the hatch finally pried open with a groan of protesting metal, everyone froze. Inside was a child. At least, that was the closest word any of them could find. She was small, maybe the size of a human 5- or 6-year-old, curled up in a nest of torn insulation and emergency blankets. Her skin was a soft, iridescent blue, like light reflected off deep water. Two large, dark eyes dominated her face, and thin, delicate ridges ran along the sides of her head where human ears would be. She wore what remained of a pressure suit, clearly not designed for her species, and she was clutching a small, broken device to her chest like a lifeline. "She's alive," said Mara, the ship's medic, already moving forward. "Barely, but alive." They got her to the med bay within minutes. The scans were confusing. Her biology didn't match anything in the databases, but it also wasn't hostile to the ship's environment. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and exhausted beyond anything Mara had seen in a child, human or otherwise. But she lived. When she finally woke up, it was Elias who was sitting by her bed. He'd expected fear. Screaming. Maybe some kind of alien equivalent of panic. Instead, she just stared at him. Her eyes were enormous up close, reflecting the soft med bay lights. She made a small, uncertain sound, somewhere between a chirp and a whisper, and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "It's okay," Elias said gently, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "You're safe. We found you. You're not alone anymore." She didn't understand his words. That much was obvious. But she seemed to understand his tone. The tension in her shoulders eased just a little. Over the next few days, they learned a few things. She didn't speak any known language. She did, however, learn quickly. Very quickly. She picked up gestures first, then simple sounds. She laughed, an odd, musical sound, when the engineer, Tom, made ridiculous faces at her. She liked sitting by the observation window and watching the stars. And she followed Mara around the med bay like a shadow, curious about everything and afraid of nothing. They called her Lumi because her skin shimmered softly in the light. No one knew where she'd come from. The escape pod's records were corrupted beyond recovery, and the broken device she'd been clutching seemed to be some kind of beacon or communicator, but its power source was dead, and its internal structure was far beyond anything the Wayfarer's mercy could repair. She could be from anywhere, Priya said one evening in the mess hall. Or anyone. That pod could have been drifting for decades. Elias looked through the viewport toward the med bay, where Lumi was currently trying to help Mara by handing her tools in entirely the wrong order. Then we'll take care of her until we figure it out. And so they did. Weeks turned into months. Lumi grew stronger. She learned to walk the ship's corridors without holding onto the walls. She learned a handful of basic words in trade common, mostly the important ones: food, sleep, Eli, and safe. She developed a fierce attachment to the crew, especially Elias, whom she seemed to have decided was hers in some quiet, unspoken way. The Wayfarer's mercy changed, too. They stopped taking riskier salvage jobs. They avoided unstable systems. They installed extra safety protocols. The crew started joking that they'd become a family ship instead of a salvage tug. Elias didn't correct them. One night, as the ship drifted between stars, Lumi sat beside him on the bridge, swinging her legs that didn't quite reach the floor. Eli, she said, pointing at the stars on the main screen. Yeah, he asked. She touched her chest, then pointed at the stars again. Home. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. We're still looking, he said softly. But we'll find it. Or we'll make one. She seemed to think about that, then leaned against his arm and closed her eyes. For a while it was enough. Then the long-range sensors started screaming. Priya was the first to see it. Captain, you need to look at this. The main screen shifted, showing a distortion in space. Not a jump point. Not a wormhole. Something else. Something controlled. A massive shape began to emerge.
No.
Not a shape. A fleet. Ships unlike anything in human space. Sleek, impossibly smooth, their hulls marked with flowing patterns that seemed to shift as you looked at them. Energy readings spiked across every band. The Wayfarer's Mercy system struggled just to process what they were seeing. Power signatures are off the charts, Tom said, his voice tight. Whatever those are, they're not here to trade scrap. A single vessel broke formation and moved forward. A transmission cut through their comms, clear and impossibly strong. This is the sovereign voice of the Aurelian Concord. Human vessel, you are in possession of something that belongs to us. You will power down and prepare to be boarded. The bridge went silent. Elias swallowed. We don't have. Lumi's small hands tightened around his sleeve. He looked down. She was staring at the screen, her eyes wide, her skin shimmering with a nervous, flickering light. Eli, she whispered. Mother. The word hit him like a punch. Mara stepped forward slowly. Lumi, is that your family? Lumi nodded, pressing closer to Elias. Mother.
And many.
They come. Priya's fingers flew over her console. Captain, they're locking weapons. Not firing, yet, but they could swat us like a fly. Elias stood up. No one's boarding this ship, he said. And no one's taking her by force. He opened a channel. This is Captain Elias Mercer of the Wayfarer's Mercy. The child you're talking about, she's been under our protection for months. She was alone, injured and lost. We saved her. If you want to talk, we can talk. But you don't get to threaten us. There was a pause. Then the voice returned, colder. You do not understand. That child is not merely a citizen. She is the daughter of High Matriarch Serlith. Her disappearance has placed our entire civilization on the brink of war. You will comply." Lumi trembled. Elias felt anger rise in his chest, hot and steady. "She's not a cargo crate. She's a kid. And she's scared." Another pause. This one longer. Then a new voice came through.
Softer. Deeper.
And filled with something that sounded very much like pain. "Let me speak to her." The screen shifted, and an image appeared. A tall, luminous being, her form elegant and powerful, her eyes burning with a quiet, desperate intensity. Even through the transmission, her presence was overwhelming. "Lumi," the figure said. Lumi let go of Elias's sleeve and stepped forward, her small hands pressed to the screen. "Mother." The being's breath caught. "You are alive. By the light, you are alive." They spoke in a language no one else understood, a rapid exchange of sounds and light patterns that made the air in the bridge hum. Lumi's skin glowed brighter, responding to her mother's presence. After a moment, the High Matriarch looked back at Elias. "You kept her alive," she said. "It wasn't a question." "We did," Elias replied. "We found her alone in a wreck. We didn't know who she was. We just knew she needed help." The matriarch studied him. "Many in your position would have tried to sell her, or dissect her, or abandon her when she became inconvenient." Elias met her gaze. "She's a child." Something in the matriarch's expression shifted. Not softened. She was clearly not a being who ruled by softness, but acknowledged. "You have my gratitude," she said, "and my fleet's restraint. But understand this, the Concord cannot simply leave her here. Her absence nearly shattered us. Entire systems were preparing for war because we believed she had been taken." Mara stepped forward. "She's bonded with us. She trusts us. You can't just rip her away." Lumi looked between them, confusion and fear flickering across her features. The matriarch closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her voice was quieter. "My daughter is not a symbol. She is my child, just as she has, in some way, become yours." The bridge was silent. Finally, Elias said, "Then let her choose." Every eye turned to him. "She's old enough to know who she feels safe with," he continued. "We won't stop her from going home, but we won't force her either." The matriarch looked at Lumi. "Little light," she said gently. "You have been far from home. You have been brave beyond words. But you do not have to stay away anymore." Lumi looked at her mother. Then she looked at Elias. At Mara. At the ship that had become her world. She walked over to Elias and took his hand. Then she walked back to the screen and pressed her other hand against her mother's image. "Both?" she asked, her voice small. The matriarch's breath hitched. Elias felt his throat tighten. After a long moment, the most powerful being in that sector of the galaxy did something no one on the bridge expected. She smiled. "Perhaps," she said, "the galaxy does not have to take everything from us in order to give something back." Negotiations followed. Real ones. Careful ones. The Concord did not threaten again. The fleet powered down its weapons. And for the first time in its history, the Wayfarer's Mercy hosted diplomats from a civilization that could have crushed it without effort. In the end, they reached an agreement. Lumi would return to her people. She had to. Her place, her future, her responsibilities were there. But the humans would not be erased from her life. The Concord would establish a protected corridor between human space and Aurelian space. Lumi would visit, and the Wayfarer's Mercy, patched hull, creaky engines and all, would always be welcome. On the day she left, the crew gathered in the cargo bay. Lumi hugged everyone. Tom nearly broke down. Mara openly cried. Priya gave her a small, polished star map chip so you don't forget where we are. Elias knelt in front of her. You don't have to be brave all the time, he said. Just be you. She pressed her forehead to his. You are my home too, she said, carefully, in the words she'd learned. When the Concorde ship took her, the Wayfarer's Mercy felt impossibly empty. But weeks later, a message arrived. A video. Lumi, standing beside her mother, looking stronger, brighter, happier. And behind her, a galaxy that now knew something important. Humans were not powerful because of their ships. They were powerful because when a lost child fell into their hands, they didn't see a prize. They saw family. The Concorde delegation did not leave immediately. Their ships remained in a slow, silent orbit around the Wayfarer's Mercy, like a ring of distant stars that had decided to watch rather than threaten. For 3 days, humans and Aurelians spoke across tables that had never been meant for such meetings. Translators struggled. Concepts didn't always line up. Emotions complicated everything. But one thing was never in doubt. Lumi stayed with Elias. She slept in her small bunk in the med bay. She ate with the crew. She sat on the bridge and watched the stars. And every time the Concorde envoys asked to speak with her alone, she insisted Elias or Mara be there too. High Matriarch Sarilith noticed. You have given her something we could not, she said during one quiet conversation with Elias in the observation deck. Even with all our power, all our fleets, all our science, we could not protect her from being lost. You did. With a broken ship and no obligation. Elias shrugged. We just didn't want her to die alone. Sarilith studied the stars beyond the glass. Among my people, strength is measured in what you can command. Among yours, it seems to be measured in what you refuse to abandon. That was when the final obstacle appeared. Not from the Concorde. From humanity. A priority signal cut through the Wayfarer's Mercy's comms, flagged with multiple authority codes. The image that appeared was a human admiral, stern-faced, surrounded by tactical displays. Captain Mercer, she said, you are currently at the center of a first contact event with a superior foreign power. By authority of the United Terran Systems, you are ordered to transfer the alien miner into official custody pending diplomatic review. The bridge went ice cold. Lumi's fingers tightened around Elias's hand. She's not a specimen, Elias said carefully. She's a child. And her mother is right there. The Admiral's expression didn't change. This is bigger than you, Captain. That child represents leverage, technology, security concerns. If the Concorde is willing to threaten force over her, then she is strategically significant. Mara's voice shook with anger. She almost died alone in space. You don't get to turn that into a bargaining chip. Stand down, the Admiral replied. That's an order. Before Elias could answer, another channel opened. High Matriarch Sarilith appeared on the screen, her presence filling the bridge with quiet, terrible authority. You will not take her, she said. The Admiral stiffened. This is an internal human matter. Sarilith's eyes burned like distant suns. Then hear this as an external truth. If you attempt to seize my daughter, the Concorde will interpret it as an act of hostility. Not against a ship, not against a crew, against us. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Elias realized in that moment just how close the galaxy was to tearing itself apart again. He stepped forward. There's another way, he said. Lumi isn't a flag. She isn't a weapon. She's proof that we can do better than this. Let her go home. Let her stay connected to us. Let this be the first good story between our peoples, not the first threat. The Admiral looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she exhaled. You're asking me to trust an unknown power with a strategic asset. No, Elias said. I'm asking you to trust a mother with her child. Saralith inclined her head slightly. After a long pause, the Admiral said, This is above my pay grade. But history is made by people who decide not to turn everything into a battlefield. The channel closed. An hour later, confirmation arrived. No human intervention. No seizure. No protective custody. Lumi was free to choose. The day she left, the Concorde ship docked gently, with the Wayfarer's Mercy. Its interior was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Living light, flowing architecture, a sense of vast, quiet power held in careful balance. Lumi stood at the threshold, holding Elias's hand. You come, she asked softly. He smiled, even though his chest ached. Not today. But you know where to find us. She nodded, then hugged him as tightly as her small arms could manage. When she stepped onto the Concorde ship, Saralith knelt beside her. These humans kept you alive, she said. That debt is not forgotten. Then she looked at Elias and the crew of the Wayfarer's Mercy. Know this, she said. The Concorde does not forget kindness, or courage, or family. The ships departed without fanfare. The stars felt emptier afterward. The Wayfarer's Mercy went back to work.
Salvage. Towing.
Quiet runs along forgotten lanes. But something had changed. They weren't just a tug anymore. They were known. Months later, the first corridor opened, an officially sanctioned, heavily monitored route between human space and Aurelian space. Trade followed. Diplomats followed. Stories followed. And once a year, like clockwork, a familiar, luminous child returned aboard a Concorde escort. She grew taller, stronger, brighter. But she always ran down the ramp and threw her arms around Elias like no time had passed at all. One evening, years later, Elias stood on the bridge with an older, wiser Lumi beside him, watching the stars. You still save lost things? She asked. Yeah, he said. We try. She smiled, the same small, warm smile she'd had as a frightened child in a broken pod. That's why the galaxy trusts you now. Elias looked at the endless dark beyond the viewport and felt something rare and precious settle into his bones. They hadn't won a war. They hadn't conquered anything. They had just refused to stop being human. And somehow, that had been enough to change the stars.